Welcome to our latest transition webinar designed to help secure a sustainable future for your farm business. I'm your host, Johan Tasker. And as we say at the beginning of all our transition webinars, when we talk about a sustainable future here at Farmers Weekly, we mean a future that's sustainable financially, not just environmentally. And that means profitable farming. This webinar is called The Bottom Line, How to Use Data to Improve Farm Productivity. Forward-thinking farmers, as we know how to get the best from their business, and yet agriculture's total factor productivity is improving only slowly. So how do we speed it up, and what do we do to get more from what we do? We're going to be looking at benchmarking and gathering information, the importance of collaborating and sharing, using technology to build on current data and different data tools. And to help us do that, all that and more, we've 4 and hopefully 5 experts for you this evening. Will Foyle is a chartered surveyor with Hutchinson's. Rob Nightingale is an agronomist and sustainability specialist at Frontier. Chris Hewis is catchment advisor at Anglian Water. And Graham Barrett is National Precision Services Manager and a rural consultant at AgriVista. And hopefully in the next few minutes, we'll be joined by Richard Hooper, who leads the future farming team at Harper Adams University. First, and as if by magic, I think Richard has joined us.
Finally. Sorry about that.
Excellent. No worries. No worries. So Richard Hooper leads the future farm team at Harper Adams University. So we've got 5 experts for you this evening. Lots to get through. It's a popular webinar. All of our transition webinars are popular. Do submit questions if you have any using the chat facility. We'll try and get through as many as we can. We won't necessarily do them in order. We'll try and work it out so that there's some sort of logical flow to what we're doing. So it's more of a conversation rather than a straight sort of question and answer session. And enjoy, everyone. And that's probably me that needs to turn off my notifications. First, though, what do we mean by data? Well, for this webinar, we mean facts, measurable values, and statistics that we can collect and group together for reference or analysis, and then use those results to try and improve farming performance. So stuff that enables us, I guess, to work smarter and not just harder, but certainly to sweat all the assets that we've got. I'm going to go around the panel for the first question and ask each of our special guests how they use data in their job. So and I'm going to do that in the order that everybody is on my screen. So Chris, I'm going to start with you. How do you use data as a catchment advisor at Anglian Water?
We're using data, mainly water quality, but to sort of direct where we need to work and engage with farmers. So it's using that data to see what we're finding, working out where it's coming from, and engaging with everyone in the catchment.
Thank you. And Graham Barrett, rural consultant at AgriVista. How about yourself?
So we use data in loads and loads of different ways. I suppose a key bit for us is variable inputs. So looking at things on a subfield level, but equally looking at cost analysis of what our ag chem inputs are, as well as looking at yield data coming out of it as well for profitability maps.
So inputs and outputs. Will Foyle, chartered surveyor with Hutchinson's.
Yeah, I suppose not dissimilar from Graham, really, collecting headline data, both in terms of variable inputs, but also some of our fixed cost data, understanding how that varies from field to field and at subfield level, and then headline analysis of that as to where we can focus attention to make better informed decisions.
Thanks, Will. Rob Nightingale, Frontier.
Yes, so similar, but my core role is looking at sustainability. So looking at carbon calculators, how we can make those, and then actually how we can improve productivity on farm and reduce emissions at the same time, and those sort of bits and pieces really. So that's the core of what I do.
Thank you. And Richard Hooper?
Yeah, I mean, on the Future Farm here at Harper Adams, we gather huge amounts of data from every sector, and it's then, it's the gathering of that data, it's the processing of that data, and then it's how we interpret that data and apply. That might be historical data to inform us to make future decisions, or it might be real-time data that we can use there and then to make decisions, weather data that helps us to decide when to go out and carry out certain field operations, etc. Without that data, we're not informed to make those decisions, and that can be the simplest of data. It can be, soil sampling data that makes the decision of what you do with your next crop.
Thanks, Richard. And I think the next question, I mean, the data is so important. I think, as everybody's alluded to, it helps people make more informed decisions, better decisions, more educated decisions, basing those decisions on fact rather than hunches. It does pay dividends. It's not a particularly sexy subject for most people. How do we, and yet it does bring benefits. So I'm going to ask Rob, how do we get more people to use more data? How do we get people to embrace what is so advantageous and yet on the surface not always very interesting?
Well, I think it's about making it easy to collect in the first place, easy to understand. There's sort of two key pillars that everyone gets, but without losing the actual the insight from them. You almost need to take something that's very difficult and make it easy, rather than simplifying it. It's make it easy to engage with, because once you've got the data sets that we can produce, you can start understanding why did this field perform differently. Is it as simple as the pH is different in that field and go and measure that and then change that, or is it something more nuanced that you find? I think you need to be able to collect that data easily and then understand what challenge you're asking it, which you need help and tools to get to.
Thanks. Graham, I'll go to you. And similar thoughts?
Yeah, so similar. I mean, one concern I have over the way in which we look at data at times is that we go to a more complex view of how to look at that data. But growers out there are collecting data all the time. They might not just understand the data they're getting. So I think that's a key bit for us to do, is to educate on that data that growers have already got, rather than looking at anything more complex, really.
Thanks. And is that the same for you, Will?
Yeah, I think I'd echo thoughts so far in terms of try not to overcomplicate things. Start with what you have, but also identify what you want to get out of it, because we can, end up going down a rabbit hole with something that might not provide us an answer. If we form the question at the start and then analyze the data to give us the answer, we're working towards actually trying to achieve something.
Thank you. And I'm aware that you all sort of, in the day job, you use data on a daily basis. There's a question here from Morgan Taylor, who says, how accessible is gathering, sharing and using data for smaller farmers? I guess there'll be some farmers out there that are using data in a big way, using various sort of farm management systems, for example, and then there are other farmers out there who probably don't use those same kind of systems, but I guess equally they're probably still using data or collecting data in different ways, sometimes without even using it. Richard, so Richard, how accessible is gathering, sharing and using data for smaller farmers?
I think everything's going to be increasingly more straightforward. We've all got a phone in our pocket. That's the easiest way to collect the basic data, because you've got that with you at all times and you record things as and when they happen. So you don't need to spend a fortune necessarily on fancy software to input that data in that will give you a result. If you can't afford that or it's out of your reach, you can still record things that you can look at yourself and still make those decisions based on that simple data that you're recording. But I think it's understanding what value you're likely to get out of that data. Because what you, as a small farmer, think it's too expensive for me. Actually, if the value even on your small farm, can be tenfold benefit, then it's still worth investing in some of that software to record that data. If the perception is you're going to get a real benefit for your informed decision making.
Thanks, Richard. Chris, what are your thoughts on that accessibility of sharing or sharing using data for smaller farmers?
Yeah, I think it's a key point, and I think actually it sort of covers both the last two questions. Really, it doesn't have to be over complex. It can be simple. It can start simple, and farmers already do it. Farmers already collect data. Everyone does it, even without realizing it, comparing yields and knowing which fields are performing better than others. Varieties. People are using the recommended list, so they're using data already, whether they class it as that or not. But I think, it doesn't have to be complex. As Richard said, there's more and more options and ways to do it. Everyone has a phone, but it can be as simple as your paper records. It can be just expanding on what we're already doing. So, thinking of cattle farms, you're not just recording your calving dates. You extend it. You're looking at calving intervals, and you're picking up on losses that you maybe didn't look at before. So I think it is available to everybody. So not getting it too complex. That's the thing for a start.
So we're going to come on to that in a minute. But what we've established, that it doesn't necessarily need to involve a high setup cost, and it can still be worthwhile using data on a smaller scale, or for a smaller scale farmer. It doesn't just have to be somebody that's involved in a huge big enterprise involving hundreds of livestock or hundreds of acres or hectares. There is a question here which says, Alistair Banks is asking how to start, examples of what data should you collect, and how should you measure it sustainably. Who would like to take that one? I'm going to pick someone. Yeah, Rob. Yeah.
I think it depends on what you're doing. So obviously, sitting here as Frontier, as an ex-agronomist, you've got arable thoughts through your head. So it's all the key points around your inputs. So we're recording pesticide inputs as a legal requirement, but it's not nutrition and then yield. That's all the simple bits, if you like. I think more and more we're probably looking at what else should we record. I think, as an agronomist, when you're walking around, trying to remember when a field was ploughed, particularly now we're sort of rotational ploughing, thinking about blackgrass control, that sort of stuff. Actually being able to record that and then have that as a piece it's relatively sort of straightforward knowledge, but actually that lets you remember what you're doing and recording that. So yes, I ploughed it 3 years ago or 5 years ago. You don't forget those things. I think that's quite important sometimes. So the sort of the core metrics.
Yeah, I think for each sector there are pretty well defined KPIs, and if you can start with those KPIs that you can benchmark against other people, then that's probably a good place to start on whichever sector you're in. So whether that's with livestock growth rates, productivity figures, whatever it is, start with that, and then you can. Data you can just keep digging, can't you? But start with the basics. Things that you can then compare with other people, so you can see where you do stand, rather than data that on its own perhaps doesn't mean a great deal.
So good record keeping. Graham, what about yourself? If somebody came to you and said, where do I start? What should I be doing?
Yeah, well, I'd be similar to Rob. He mentioned that generally agronomists, whether it be a distributor agronomist or an independent, they're doing recommendations. So we have that data in the first instance. We have costs attached to it in the first instance. Growers are selling their grain, so they end up with tonnages at the end of it. So we can look at things from such a basic level of what we're already doing, and get decent cost analysis. But also we can go to the other end of the scale and look at these things subfield levels with yield data and such like that. So yeah, I think it can be as basic as that. But that's certainly where I would start, is by looking at the data that our agronomists have collected and looked at the data that the growers have already got from their inputs and what they've sold, basically.
Will, similar at Hutchinson's?
Yeah, so I'd say within our farm consultancy team, one of the things that, as an industry we've been collecting for years is yield data. And obviously people initially think of a combine, but also foragers and other harvesting implements. We're collecting that data, and historically people have printed it off and put it in a filing cabinet. Then they've probably put it on a memory stick and put the memory stick in the filing cabinet. And it's, how can we build on that? So we've got the variable cost data that Graham and Rob refer to, but also actually in this day and age, it's quite easy to start collecting some of that fixed cost data. So work rates, fuel rates, what cultivations I did, and you can really start to dial down at a field level and subfield level, both what your variable costs are, but also what your fixed costs are as well, because that's one of the biggest areas of performance difference on farm across, not only in an arable context, we can do that in a forage context on livestock farms as well.
And I guess, talking about people keeping records on bits of paper or then on the memory stick, and of course most of us at least carry a mobile phone around with us now. It's an increasingly important tool in terms of data collection. Chris, what's your thoughts on this in terms of where people start and how people actually start drilling down as well? Because there are so many data points, you could collect so much information, but at the end of the day it's only going to be useful to you if you can interrogate it in a way and come out with some sort of sensible results.
Yeah, I think the first thing to appreciate is to and it sort of goes back to what we were talking about before, is to make them real, make a grower and encourage a grower to realize that there's going to be a benefit to having this data. There's no good having data for data's sake. So demonstrating the benefits, and that can, and it depends, this starting point depends where you're at already, doesn't it? It depends where your baseline. So there's a surprising number of farmers still not mapping fields and sampling fields. So they're putting nutrients on, growers putting nutrients on where they're not needed, which of course ties into our interests. And so there might be a cost to having your fields mapped and scanned and maps drawn up of what nutrients need to go where. So you can quickly, and I know from experience, you can quickly save in fertilizer costs what that's cost you to map. So demonstrating that benefit, and of course yield mapping. If you're not yield mapping, that's a really crucial first step to highlighting where your areas of concern are and where you need to start looking at data more.
Thank you. Unless anybody else has got something more to add to that, I'm going to sort of move on to the to another question. There's a question here from, it doesn't say their surname, but Ed B says, do you think there should be or would be or could be more scope for more managed data sharing between entities? I mean, this is not only looking at data that you've collected yourself, but sharing that data in a responsible and confidential way, and often anonymous way with other people, and using their data sometimes to benchmark and compare what you're doing yourself. Richard, what are your thoughts on that? More scope for managed data sharing between entities? There's
certainly more scope for it. I mean, we've always also got to think about what that data is. That is IP for your business. It is your intellectual property. So by giving it to someone for free, we've got to be careful that as soon as that data goes out from your office into the wide world, it's no longer your data. So it's got to be managed in a way that is anonymized, or it's collated in a way that doesn't identify you, but also that somebody doesn't just get great value out of something that you've done and you get nothing from it. So it does need to be managed, the security of that data, and how that data is then going to be used for potentially your benefit. And the whole benchmarking that, you know, discussed just a minute ago about what data you get, you can benchmark against others. You know, historically there was great benchmarking groups where farmers would be really open and share that data amongst each other, and I certainly used to find those really, really useful. There was a reluctance from certain people to share data, and I think that's something that we still probably would come up against. But it's just managing it in a way that's sensible going forward. And the more data we can get on a certain area, we create that big data and a big data set, which can actually inform not only individual farmers but inform industry as well.
Will, do you find people are more willing to share data these days than they have been? I mean, you know, if you look back sort of 10 or 15 years ago, there was great suspicion as to who am I handing my data over to, and what's it going to be used for? Is it going to be used against me, or in terms of people going to be able to drive down the price that they pay me for what I'm doing? It's almost like giving too much information away. But at the same time, yeah, if that data is handled responsibly, and it can provide you with huge benefits as a grower or a livestock producer.
Yeah, I think in general, as it's become easier to share data, people are probably happier to share that. I think there needs to be the ease. So, you know, now we're getting more API links and things like that. I think people do want to know that their data is in safe hands and it's not being manipulated or mistreated, if you like. So we adhere to the UK Farm Data Principles, and I think it's important if you know, using a platform or organisation that's going to help you interpret and use your data to check that they do have a robust procedure with how they're dealing with it, and also that, you know, they're helping you achieve what your end goal is. So I circle back around to identify what it is that you want to find out from the data that you're collecting, and will sharing it help you achieve that goal? And in some instances, sharing data to help benchmark definitely has a tick against that goal.
Yeah. Graham, yourself, in terms of sharing data?
Yeah. So yeah, I agree with what Will's been saying. Really, you know, it's important for us all to be able to share data. It's important to make sure growers are protected from how data is shared. But you know, the value attached to some of that data that's being shared is really, really quite important. Yeah, and at AgriVista we use several partners, which, you know, it's important for us to be able to share data amongst those partners. So things are improving on that side of things. I think there is a way to go before we get to a sensible place where we're able to share data, you know, amongst the whole industry. I think, you know, there is some effort to be put in there, but it is moving in the right direction, definitely.
And Rob, if we look at things like, just go with me on this, if you look at sort of mobile phone contracts, you know, years ago, it was quite difficult to move between providers from one mobile phone company to another. In an agricultural context, we, of course, in terms of machinery, we have things like Isobus that allows different machines to talk to one another, even though they might be by different manufacturers. Ed B, who I think is Ed Bourneton, it looks like he's a student at Royal Ag University at Cirencester. He's saying, how careful do growers need to be with lock-in? If I want to switch, for example, from Hutchinson's to Agri, or whoever it might be, for AgriVista to Frontier, is that easy to do? How do you guys work together to maintain, I guess, client confidentiality whilst reaping the benefits of data sharing, or are you all sort of, do you work separately, or do your systems talk to each other? How kind of multilingual are they?
I think it's the data set itself is multilingual. You know, field boundaries are universal between all of these platforms. It's about the, you know, so take the approach that the farmer owns that data set, and then once they own that data set, that is their data, so they can move it around as they please. So if they would like to share it, then they can share it. I think that's really the key to me. I mean, we see a lot of tools, and particularly in the sustainability space, about where we're looking at carbon calculators and how carbon calculators work and all the different nuances in terms of what information they require. I get quite frustrated because actually what happens on farm is there's only so many things. You put inputs on, you grow a wheat variety, a barley variety, whatever it is, you have a yield coming off it, you have a soil type. These things are fairly static in terms of what you're measuring. It's just the degree you're measuring them to. So I think it's quite key that data set is your data set as a farmer, and that is shareable, and make that bit as good as possible. So, if you've got, yields from certain fields, you'll know that we can then deal with that whenever you come to whoever in these in the supply chain to help with that.
So the stuff is fairly transferable then between providers, as it were. Yeah. Richard, I'm keen to get your thoughts on this as somebody at Harper who's sort of working on the future farm.
Yes, certainly our experience has been that actually we're trying to get a platform, a Harper platform for all of our data. And we've got so many different software applications that all do things very differently. But actually it's been quite refreshing when we've spoken to the different providers that we can get APIs to link the data we've got in one software application onto our platform. We're yet to launch the platform, but we're getting there with it, which from a farm management point of view will be a lot more straightforward to have everything in one place, for students and for teaching as well, exactly the same, and for research to really dig down into that data in one place rather than trying to trawl through several different software applications. So I think things are improving all the time, and but it's important. Obviously, your data is your data, and the other thing is, we found working with Hutchinson's on sort of Omnia and Terra mapping. We don't use Hutchinson's as our provider for agronomy anymore, but we still use the Terra mapping and the Omnia platform. So I think these companies obviously can work with you on certain elements and not other elements, and you can work with somebody else. So it works for us at the moment.
Thanks, Richard. Chris, in terms of talking to the different sorts of data sharing, and how does it work at Anglian Water?
It's not something we really get into, Johan, but we do. We share data. We have an agreement with some people, like with soil probes, soil moisture probes, and we share data to growers to help them with their businesses, whether it be planning cultivations or whatever, but soil moisture probes and nitrogen probes. So we're gathering data with an agreement that we can share it, but on a larger scale, it's not something we're involved in really. But I think for farmers, actually, it's realizing that it's keeping in mind that data is a commodity. It's got a value. Certainly with the supply chain.
Yeah, does it? You say about it having a value. I mean, is the value greater to the farmer or the producer, or is it greater to the supply chain? What would you say, Chris?
Well, there needs to be fairness, doesn't there? If supply chain partners are going to use that data to, whether it be sustainability, carbon footprint, premiums on products, that has to be a fair valuation down to the grower. Whether it is, I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. There's let's go on to another question. Tracy Wayton Jones, Rare Breed Survival Trust Advisor. I'm going to Richard can take this one initially. I mean, what's your opinion on academic data gathering and interpretation compared to farmer-led field lab type research? Do both have equal merit?
I think they all have merit, because I can carry out a full-scale research project that has lots of replication and has lots of power to give us scientific value to say yes, that's proven. But I can do that at Harper Adams in a field or in a pen or wherever it was, livestock or field, and that will give us a scientific answer. it doesn't mean that when I go to Joe Bloggs' farm up the road and say, we found this, that they will find it, because they've got different soil conditions, they've got different breed types. And actually, I've always encouraged farmers to do their own on-farm studies of whatever scale that might be, to see what works for them in their conditions with their breed types, their soil types, their weather conditions. Because what I see at Harper won't be that replicable necessarily in every situation. So I think they've all got value, and that's the value of data, like we were talking about. It's, if you can record those things in your own situation, they probably have a lot more value to you in your situation than they do in somebody else's situation. But it's understanding the principles. We can show the principles of the science that will lead you down that road, and then you can fine tune that and nuance that to what your own situation. So I think, yeah, definitely have real value on farm lab type studies.
And I guess Hutchinson's, Frontier, Agravista will all be to a certain extent at that interface between sort of the commercial world or the on-farm world and the academic world too. Graham, is that right for you?
Yeah, so I think it's important to follow all these trials right the way through from the beginning to a normal field type scale, and like Richard was saying, locality's pretty important to this data as well. Hence the reason we all have trial sites up and down the country. I struggle to mention too much about livestock, but from certainly from a cereal perspective, it's incredibly important to be looking at data on varieties across the country rather than just in one location.
Thank you. And Will, same for Hutchinson's, yeah, or similar at least.
Yeah, I mean, I'd echo those thoughts. I think the thing that I would add, Johan, is people talk about benchmarking and gathering data and comparing within a similar data set or locality. If we're talking about sort of crop trials or something like that, there's still a lot of value to be gained from almost internal benchmarking and setting a standard within your own business that then you can compare other measurables against, and that is equally applicable in the arable sector as it is to the horticultural sector, as it is in the livestock sector. We don't always need to look externally. Sometimes we can look internally for that data as well.
So externally being comparing yourself to other farm businesses, performance elsewhere of whatever kind, and then internally, is that between fields, or is that between seasons, or is that a mixture of both? How
I think a mixture of both. Yeah. So it could be on a field by field basis. It could be, and then you could almost look at, you could compare field by fields with yield trends over seasons to give you a benchmark. We do something where we look at average consistency. So is a field for its yield always consistent, average, inconsistently inconsistent, or consistently inconsistent, etc. And from that, you can then start to make some much better decisions around what you do with some of those sub-field parcels of land. But then equally, and I'm similar to Graham, I'm afraid, and I appreciate we're quite a arable horticultural centered panel tonight, but sure. In the livestock context as well, there's measurables. I've got a client who's finishing tens of thousands of sheep a year, and he is collecting really intense data from the people that he's buying those store lands from, and that's helping him make decisions as to what types of breeds and who he's purchasing from in subsequent years as well.
Thank you. Thanks, Will. Rob, come to you. How about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, so I think the on-farm pieces have been touched on, but I think in terms of looking at big data, and that's where, coming to Chris's point about actually sort of valuing data. So Frontier is starting to reward for data and moving that through the supply chain for certain customers. that actually starts bringing us comparable across larger areas, because I think as we go forward and we look at some of the biggest challenges that are going to come to farming as an industry in the next 15, 20 years, lots of those are going to be about location, about what risks are you facing in your areas, and how can supply chains help and support that. So actually having access to big data sets, you move away from looking at tiny differences in trials and actual sort of, very precise measurements. You get out and you can start taking out sort of big trends, and you can look at trend analysis then, and that's where sharing big data and having big data sets really does help our show and lead how we can adopt certain practices and move the needle in certain areas.
Thank you. Thanks. Let me get this right. So Frontier, you have Yagro is one of your companies, is that right? So you have Yagro. So and Hutchinson's has Omnia, Agravista. You have One Soil and all of these various. Could each of you just sort of talk me through the I guess the business model, almost, as it were? Is this all of this stuff free? Is it premium or freemium, as they say? Is part of it free? At what stage can people get involved in each of these sort of pieces of software? Rob, I'll start with you, and then I'll go to Graham, and then I'll go to Will. I mean, I'm not asking you to sell me the product. I'm just sort of trying to give people a sense of at what level can they get involved in this.
So we've got there's the Frontier side of this, where you've got all the precision farming services that we'd bring. So you can do everything from soil sampling to biomass mapping on farm, and all those good services. You've got all the agronomy service side, so all the data we're collecting there in terms of what's been applied, when we're doing it. Then you've got Yagro as a data partner. They are a separate company. There is a full data governance set between the two businesses, but what they do is they take data sources, they take all data streams that you can get hold of, and then they are very much about cleaning it and verifying it. So when you are using Yagro, you are getting the best analysis you can get. So you are properly comparing apples with apples. So you won't have missed things. So if you take something like urea, people will put urea into a system and they'll call it urea, or they'll call it granular urea, or they'll call it Yara urea, or it'll have a product name, or it'll be 46N or something like that. It's trying to get all of that noise out of data sets. So when you've got a comparable piece, you are comparing yourself and benchmarking against farmers in the most accurate way you can to see where you perform against other things.
Okay, is that sort of free, or is there different levels that you can get involved in?
There's different levels to get involved in, because the data cleaning piece, there's lots of different offers in there in terms of the source sample piece and the actual physical bit. What we are also doing is we're looking at how visualizing this into a map. So it's about that intelligence and location, and actually having where you are in your fields, and actually having the data alongside of that and trying to visualize it. That's all going to start coming through, because there is lots of data sets that exist already. We've got you've got things like Landis, you've got things like which is the soil type mapping underneath, you've got environment areas, you've got triple SIs. It's all of this, and putting all this into one space so you can see it. That will start becoming part of what our service is.
Okay. Thanks, Rob. Graham, how about yourself at Agravista?
Yeah, so it's a bit of a minefield, to be fair, this whole subject, which I think is quite clear. Our main platform is Insight, which is free to growers. However, there are aspects of it that are chargeable, depending on what you sort of want to achieve. But I mean, the end goal for Insight is to give growers a single platform to be able to access all the data they need to on farm. So the likes of, Rob said it, biomass data, carbon data, profitability maps, soil nutrition data, you know, basically all of that data, trying to get it into one place. And I suppose our real end goal is to come up with true cost of production maps, true profitability maps. We're already creating them on a regular basis. It's just how getting the quality of data and getting the quantity of data is going to be key going forward to getting those to the most accurate point.
Thanks. And Will, yourself at Hutchinson's?
Yeah, so Omnia is sort of our central data platform, of which we are collecting, fairly seamlessly a lot of data. We have API links with a lot of people sort of across the industry. I think that's a good way in terms of getting clean, robust data. A lot of the times that data often sort of gets misinterpreted is when it's re-entered and re-entered. So the API links sort of prevent that. There is a free access version, so that certainly is a starting point for collecting some of the data that we're talking about tonight. And there's an app on your phone, which makes it quite easy as well to ensure that you're regularly updating and putting that data in. And I think, touching on what others have said, it's then being able to visualize that in a map. So it's overlaying all of that information that you're capturing, going right back to the start. You know, we talked about a yield map. We can then take a yield map. We can turn that into a profit and loss map variably across the field. We can overlay all of our variable costs, all of our fixed costs, and we can then start to make some much better decisions. But I think the thing, to stress, it's the farmers' data. They can choose who has access, and I think Richard touched before on, Harper Adams use the Omnia platform. They don't necessarily use us for agronomy, and that's fine. There's other agronomists out there using the Omnia platform to put their spray recommendations in, but we can still complete that bigger picture to give us some really good insight and answers to make better decisions on farm.
Thank you. Thanks, Richard. Will mentioned you. There's a question here from Brendan Hamill. It says, given Harper Adams' point of view, why do more farms not? Why don't they do soil biological analysis? Why? What's holding people back from embracing some of this stuff?
Good question. Who knows? I mean, I suspect there's a multitude of different reasons for stopping people. Cost being one of them. The understanding, I think, of what the potential benefits are is what we've got to get across to people. That if you can get this data and the impact that will have on your business in terms of the return on investment, if we can really show that to people, then people will engage with it. And I say I don't know everyone's individual motivation on things, but to me, if you haven't got that data, how do you make those informed decisions? How do you drive your business forward? Like you say, you end up doing the averages. You end up just putting a blanket treatment on, and in this day and age, you can't afford to do that. You've got to be more precise, and that is what precision farming is. Precision farming to me is using the data available to you to make decisions, and that's the way forward. So if you're not engaging with it, you should be, and you will be if you want to stay in business going forward, would be my thought on it.
Thanks, Richard. Okay, so Richard's given his thoughts there. One sort of saying that there has to be a benefit for people to do this, and in many cases, I guess it has to be sort of a not obvious benefit. I mean, that is one thing that you're particularly good at, in terms of showing that changes in management practice, it can be beneficial to the farm business, and not just saying that, but actually measuring it and showing how much of a benefit it can be.
Yeah, and I think it's been able to demonstrate to growers the benefit of that. So understanding those results from those biological activity, whether you're comparing fungi bacteria ratios, whatever, it's demonstrating the benefit of that. And even if it's on farm, just comparing where they're doing two different practices, where they're changing their practice and doing a comparison to see how that's improving the soil health. And we encourage. It goes back actually a little bit to when you was asking Richard about comparing the benefit of doing things at Harper, but doing it on farm. I think this lady asked about Rare Breeds Trust.
Yeah.
I think the benefit of from Richard's side of doing it Harper is you can really illustrate what things you need to compare and what things you need to monitor and gather data on. But then it's down to doing it on the individual farm. There's nothing better than doing it actually on the farm. And it's something we often say to growers, that they know their farm best. Every grower knows his farm best. It's no good you trying to tell them what works for them. They know it best. So it's why we've encouraged and supported farmers to do on farm trials on their own farm. You know, if there's going to be a benefit to soil health or the water quality, and you know, they know it best. They know the situation best. But we encourage farmers to do their own trials. So it's something we have supported.
Thank you. I'm going to ask a question. Sophia Long says, are any of the panel collecting real-time data using sensors apart from weather? So sort of this idea of constantly monitoring something using a sensor rather than measuring something at a moment in time. Are you doing that at Harper, Richard?
I mean, we do a lot of that with livestock in terms of the environment, because obviously we can control the environment within buildings by taking that real-time data through a sensor. We've got, like I say, the weather and soil conditions type live stream data as well. But it isn't always necessarily you need that absolutely to be the live. Some historic data still has really good value in terms of making decisions going forward. But yeah, we have certain elements that are live, certain elements that's historic, and it's just piecing all that together to give you that bigger picture and make the decisions.
Thank you. Will, you want to make a point about marginal gains? You're on mute. Can I think
sorry, apologies, it wouldn't let me unmute myself there. Yeah, sorry, it was probably touching just on the previous point, Johan, but I think sometimes people think that they should be using data to, you know, find this pot of gold at the end of a rainbow, and actually it's focusing on sort of marginal gains. So, you know, an analogy that I'd give, variable rate drilling on variable soil types might give you somewhere in a 2 to 3% yield increase. If, as a percentage of turnover, profit was 10% of turnover, which isn't dissimilar to what we're seeing for a number of sort of broadacre farming businesses at the moment, well, actually that 2 to 3% yield advantage for no additional cost is giving me a 20 to 30% profit advantage, or increase in my profit margin.
Yeah.
So it's focus. There's not a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow that's going to make a massive difference. It's focusing on those small areas that are important to create those marginal gains that have a much bigger impact to your bottom line.
Thank you.
It's probably worth clarifying.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thanks for the clarification. Rob, you're nodding. I mean, do you want to address that point, or do you want to address the point about sort of real-time data collection?
I can answer a bit about both. I think on marginal gains, I think it's really hard to see 1 or 2% sometimes, and I think that's the bit is being able to do something and make an action, and then make sure you record it. You know, when you talk about variable rate seed drilling there, Will, you know, we've done that for a number of years now, and you can go out and do it, and actually, if you don't go and prove that you've got more plants in those hectares to yourself, or square meters, by measuring it, and see the yield benefit, it's hard to see a yield benefit when you've got variability from weather, which can be, you know, 1 or 2 tons a hectare. You lose those marginal bits, but actually the marginal bits are still there. So I think it's having something that you can, you know, do one thing and then go and actually measure that you've done it, and you can see that it's happened. So that's that piece. In terms of real time pieces, yeah, I mean, satellite, we got weather stations set up as well. I think actually there's other bits that you can do, and you know, well, certainly I've had customers which, you know, on farm grain stores and actually monitoring their grain stores remotely. So you've got, you know, real time sensors in your grain store. it's quite, you put dry grain in the shed is fine. Actually getting that right, you can go from, particularly something like malting barley, you can go from perfect malting barley to not perfect malting barley really quickly, and actually you can see premiums change quite drastically on the back of that. So there's real-time sensors in all sorts of places now that you can really make some tangible benefits to the business on.
Thank you, Graham. Other than weather, any sort of real-time data collection and analysis?
Yeah, so we do look at a few things. I suppose the bits that we're looking at are more that they are commercially available. However, they're more of a research thing. So looking at real-time insect traps as an example, especially with the pressures of growing oilseed rape at the moment. I've seen some nice crops of oilseed rape around for a change this year, but that is a significant challenge, and so those things can just start to aid some decisions. Likewise, looking at what nutrition loss we've got in the soil as well. So we have some real-time sensors looking at how we're losing nutrition. I think we all have a reasonable idea, and from static sensors you can have an idea, but real-time sensors, they really do start to show the peaks and troughs of what's happening with certain nutrition. So they're probably the two main areas of real-time sensors that we're using.
Do you, a question here from Anastasia McPartland, who says, is data sharing and collaboration between farms as well as agribusinesses the answer to resilience and future growth? Or is that just a utopian idea and not practical? So again, sort of collaboration, data sharing, working in partnership, I guess. Well, Chris, we'll go to you. I mean, you do collaborate with farmers. You are encouraging them to become more resilient, and I guess that encourages in turn future growth. So it is practical, yeah.
Yeah, I think it is, and it's a big thing that we encourage, where we can't support every farmer in our business. We wouldn't want to do that, but we encourage collaboration of where somebody is doing something and gaining knowledge, and it's basically knowledge sharing. Whether that comes under data sharing, I'm not sure, but certainly knowledge sharing and collaborating certainly is a big benefit. Yeah. And if it's improving all their businesses, that's the way to resilience, isn't it? I don't know whether it's achievable. There's still resistance, I think, and we touched on it earlier. There is still that resistance to share too much, I find. I don't know how you overcome that hurdle.
It's difficult, isn't it? I mean, I think it is changing now. I think more people are realizing that there are benefits from sharing, and that data on its own just is of limited value. But when you've got a lot of data out there, and especially when you can interrogate it, it does enable you to make more informed and more valuable decisions, even if, as has been said, it's hard to see that sort of 1 or 2%. Richard, what about yourself in terms of?
I think some of the recent changes and the real changes are things like the sustainable farm networks. Getting networks of networks is where you really do get that knowledge sharing, which is a lot of it data sharing, and that is happening. Whereas previously there was lots of small networks around the country that work well as a small network, but now we're getting networks of networks, and that I think is really powerful for that data share and knowledge share activity. So I think it's progressing, it's getting there, and I think people are really understanding the power of that data now, rather than, well, I don't want to share my data with my next door neighbour. I think people are realising the power of that data in terms of their business and in terms of their sector, or even the wider industry. So I think
we're seeing the big growth in across our region of clusters, farm clusters as well, and there's a lot of benefit in those, with farmers coming together, similar interests, wanting similar outcomes, and getting landscape scale conversations going.
Thank you, Graham. I mean, this idea of resilience, you must be, data can improve resilience, yeah, especially when it's shared.
Yeah, definitely. I suppose we've talked about marginal gains. They're there can be the other end of the scale with some of these things as well. I think about what Frontier and Soil did with grid mapping all those years ago in the 90s, and a lot of us have followed suit since. I think something as simple as variable soil sampling can make a huge difference. I think the key behind that is, and I think we're in a different place now to where we were 25 years ago, that we've managed to build up enough data to understand what soil types see the best returns from variable rate nutrition. Yes, you can build up soil types. You build up what indices look like from a sort of broad acre approach to see if they're going to see benefits, and the location, because certain areas of the country will benefit from maybe variably applying one or two nutrients, and other places will benefit from others. So I think that's a real key to sharing this data, is being able to get that. And we're fortunate at Agrovista, we can build up quite a lot of data across the country, and although that data is not necessarily shared amongst everybody openly, we are able to sort of take an approach and suggest to growers where they might be able to save more money. And I think that's the other key thing when we're looking at data, is that actually if we can look at what data growers are either collecting or what their aspirations are to collect data, we can understand what their best options are to make the best gains for their farms. So I think using this data can make a massive difference on farm.
And increasingly it is being done responsibly. There's a message here. It's not so much a question, but Julian Gardner, who is somebody who's worked with farm data in particular for a good number of years now, he says, as Will says, farmers should be asking and expecting their data handling organisations to do stuff responsibly. And Julian suggests, that they should be signed up to something like the Farm Data Principles, which is something that's designed to give farmers confidence that there is transparency about how their data is used, and that it is being used responsibly. Richard, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, we're slightly different. We're going down the route that all of our data will be free access data from everything that we do. Part of that's when we do a study. If it's done for a commercial partner, it's different. But if it's done for a government-funded study, there is an expectation that data is readily available. So we're going down the route of where there is no sort of a commercial concern or commercial ownership of that data, that our data will be readily available anyway. I think, it's responsible. It's got to be the owner's permission for that data to be shared ultimately. So as long as whoever you're dealing with that data asks you whether they can pass that data on, then it's down to you whether you make that data readily available or not. And everyone will have a different view on that, and whether that's available anonymized or whether that's available with your farm name or your soil type or whatever you're on it, then I think it's just having the permission. And you would like to think that most people within the industry are going to be respecting that, because they're not going to be in the industry for too long if they start passing people's data without permission.
Sure. Thoughts, Rob? You're nodding again. Thoughts on that? Data use transparency and data security, using data responsibly.
Yeah, I think data governance is a really key bit, and I think we have so much data on us already, just in day-to-day lives. I think it's an interesting psychological piece in this, because you get people that sign up to like club cards and Nectar cards and all this sort of stuff. That's shopping data being generated on you 24/7 when you're shopping in these supermarkets. Actually, what comes out the back of that is, in theory, a better experience for you when you go into the supermarket, or you get targeted results for you. So I think how we talk about data governance, and I think we should have clear boundaries, and I've been involved in writing contracts that have those clear boundaries in them when you're sharing data, what it'll be used for, where it ends up, what's the limits of it. But actually, I think to go to the effort of collecting data on you in this industry, actually we're not here to target people, we're here to help people. And I think that is a shift in mindset that is slowly happening. And I think that's what, to Richard's point about sharing all data, I think if we can get to a point where we're comfortable sharing certain elements of data, we can help all of the industry rather than, trying to pick on people.
Thank you. Will, thoughts on data sharing?
I think it's, I think we need to get more comfortable with it. I think, how can we achieve value from it if we're not happy to sort of work together and try and ask the bigger questions and the so what questions? And come back around to what Julian's saying, farm data principles, certainly worth people checking out. It is your data. It's how you want it to be shared. You're in control of it, but ultimately, if we want to be more resilient, then I think we need to be, working towards at least being in a position that we're more comfortable with sharing that data.
Yeah. I guess, Graham, it is quite literally a case of strength in numbers. The numbers themselves, but also the more numbers that they are, that there are, the better the information source.
Yeah, so it's like anything. The more data you collect, the better things become, for sure. And I'd also echo what I think it was Richard said, that our customers, our users, have to be the ones that are there to share the data. If they don't want to share their data, then that doesn't go into the pot of data. But I think everybody said the same. I think we're getting more comfortable sharing data in our day-to-day lives, let alone in agriculture. And I think those things can only get better in agriculture. There's not lots of mean ways to use this data. Some could use the data irresponsibly if they really wanted to, but I mean, the long term, there wouldn't be any long-term gain in doing that. So, I think everybody's getting better at sharing data, and I think we're getting a lot better at using that data as well.
Sorry, just following on from that. I think actually the data helps us. Particularly, I'm talking from where I sit in terms of linking in with our grain customers. Actually, if we don't share some data and some insight about this is what UK farming is doing today for your grain growing, there's other data sources, and people sort of make assumptions. And if you're making those assumptions, that you're not telling the full story, because normally those assumptions are a little bit out of date or misaligned, or they're getting information from somewhere else. Actually, having live data and feeding that in really helps explain farming and reconnect to the consumer, which I think we all desperately need to do.
Thank you. Question here. We've got, about 10 minutes left on this. Paul Hartley from Frank Hartley and Sons asks, or says, the final cost per tonne or cost per area is often overlooked at the end of a cropping year. Using real-time figures, cropping costs and yield data, this can sometimes also be overlooked in the end of year accounts in overall farm profits and loss. And then the question is, do you think that if farm accountants had access to more of this data from clients, good or bad crop choice would be highlighted clearer? I guess, are we concentrating too much on the agronomic side of things and the performance side in that respect, at the expense of the sort of, it's no longer pounds, shillings and pence, is it? But the financials.
Do you want me to go on that? Yeah.
Yeah, go on, Will. Yeah.
I mean, in fairness, this is the sort of, we're now at that level of data that seamlessly we can run that through the Omnia platform. The second you've got the yield mapping, you've got virtual grain sales from the shed, you've got a profit and loss map. And I think people sometimes forget about focusing, like Paul rightly says, cost of production is a key metric. And sometimes you see sort of benchmarking groups, and they'll be looking at take variable costs, for instance. A top performing farm has a 7% higher variable cost spend to an average farm, but it has a 19% greater yield, so its cost of production is going to be less. So that data's there. We can do it. Let's actually start looking at them. Doesn't necessarily need to be the accountant that's advising. Farmers can do it themselves, or the panel on this call equally can go out to farm and start help making much better decisions off the back of this sort of data. It's there.
Yeah, I'll just say with that you can't, like, once you've got a cost of production map, you've got these coloured maps that are showing you which areas of these fields are making money and which areas of these fields aren't. That is pretty hard to ignore when you get to that point. And I think that has got to be the end goal, regardless of what inputs or regardless of what schemes or anything you're trying. That cost of production has got to be the end goal for as many as we can, because that is going to tell the biggest story, definitely.
Thank you. Isn't it, as we sort of draw to a close over the next sort of few minutes, there's some interesting sort of ideas here. Tracy Wathan-Jones again, saying that we're asking, how can we ensure benchmarking it takes into account the complexities of different farming systems, breeds of livestock, etc., etc. Her sort of more specific question is, and I'm going to add my little bit on the end of this, but she says, does benchmarking run the risk of oversimplifying our farm businesses? I mean, Richard, I'm going to ask you, do you think that is it possible to run a farm on data alone? There's still going to be ultimately there's still going to be a role for farmers in this. Farm businesses are so complex, so talk around that to me. I mean, Tracy,
absolutely. I mean, every business will be different in terms of, like what you said before, breeds, what have you. But that benchmarking is still an indicator, is still a guide for your business, unless you are totally out there and totally different with what you're doing. So I don't think it does oversimplify it. It is a good indicator, and then it's up to you how deep you delve and how deep you delve within your own business. And we've said, that you're on farm trials, etc., etc. They're going to give you the information, and several people have said, your farm better than anybody else. So you've still got to, you will still have the nuances of your farm that will be different than that data, but it's still relevant, that data, because you've got to have something to baseline against. And like the previous thing we were saying about the cost of production, at the end of the day, it is all about your profitability, whether that's per ton, per acre, whatever it is, and how you get there will be different than somebody up the road. That the old saying that is it yield is vanity, profit is sanity, and it's that we all get there in a different way, but you still need something to look against. Otherwise, how do you improve? How do you make those small tweaks that in your business will give you those marginal gains? Because that's where you do make that extra, is by doing the finer sort of tuning really well to make those gains. But you've still got to have someone to compare against, and it might not be perfect, but it's better than nothing.
Chris, thanks, Richard. Chris, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the benchmarking is valuable, but it's about make sure you're comparing apples and apples. Find a farm that's similar to yours, similar enterprises, similar soil types or systems, and making sure you're benchmarking. And you won't be able to compare exactly, but it might highlight one aspect of your business that you need to go away and look at and think, why are we so far out? And if you can justify it, and it comes back to data, you've got your own data, and you can, if you think you're way out from the norm on a certain aspect, as long as you can justify that because of the nuances of your business in your location, so be it. So yeah, there is a benefit, definitely, but it's making sure you're comparing like for like.
Thank you. I'm gonna I can't resist this one, so just briefly, and then I'm going to ask people for sort of take-home messages. If there's one sort of message that people would like to get across, or people to think about after they've been watching this Farmers Weekly Transition webinar, what would it be? But the question is, You can't get away from this sort of thing at the moment. Harry Parsons, how does the panel think artificial intelligence can currently be used to aid data management and the resultant decision making on farm? Are any of you using AI to sort of aid data management at all? Rob?
Yeah, definitely. So Jaguar are definitely pioneering how to use AI and how to use AI to analyze data. What AI is fantastic at is taking lots and lots and lots of data points, which we all, we've talked about. We've got lots and lots of pieces of data, and trying to find correlations. Now, the only bit that I would caution is that correlation is not always causation. I think it's very good at finding correlation. And we can all, you say, actually, you look at these two data sets and you've got something different. Actually, is that the cause or not? That's the bit that, luckily, I think still human intelligence needs to be involved in it. Otherwise, we'd all be out of a job, worried about AI in that way. But yeah, that finding the cause is still needed, but it gets you to that answer much quicker. That's the real key.
Thanks. Graham, are you using AI to help with data management at all, you guys?
We use it in a few different ways. From we'll use AI to interrogate simple Excel spreadsheets. It's so freely available within simple tools that it is usable. So we use it in that. We use it in some disease detection stuff. So yeah, it's something that is definitely being used amongst the industry. I think all of the big distributors will be using it for sure.
Brings me nicely on then to Will. I mean, Will, at Hutchinson's, are you guys using it?
Yeah, I mean, personally, I'm more of the so what man in terms of how do we use that data to help us make better informed decisions. So you're talking to the wrong person in exactly how we use it, but I know we are. I know there's people, within our software teams that are, using exactly the sort of same things that Rob and Graham have touched on.
Okay, Richard, Harper Adams.
Yeah, again, not me personally. I'm the man on the ground, but we will be using AI, and AI does have its place. At the end of the day, it's going to speed up a lot of that processing and interpretation. It might not be 100%, but it's going to take a lot of that away from people. And if we want people to engage with data, if something can spit that interpretation and that processing can do it all for you, then people will engage with it more if it's easy. So it's going to make life easier for people. Like I say, you've got to be cautionary with some of the interpretation of the end of it, like Rob was saying.
Thank you. And finally, Chris, on this one.
Yeah, I'm not the man to talk about this from our business, but yes, it has been talked about. It will be used. We've got a specific data and technology team, so they will be using it.
Thank you. Thanks. Well, look, that just about sort of wraps up this episode, as it were, this webinar, this Farmers Weekly Transition webinar on the bottom line, how to use data to improve farm productivity. But I'm going to go round and I think I'll start with Richard first, and I'm going to go, people have sort of, just because of the way these things work, the screens have sort of changed, but I'm going to go anti-clockwise around the screen and just ask people for a sort of final take-home message, as it were, at the end of this webinar. So if there's one thing you'd like somebody to remember from this webinar, Richard, what would it be?
I think there was a saying I was told quite a while ago, that without data, you're just another person with an opinion. And I think that sums it up, really.
That's a good one, short and sweet as well. Will, how about you?
I've written down, start simple, build on what you have, and it doesn't have to be expensive. We've all touched on some of the free access levels that there are to platforms out there, but just start somewhere.
Thank you. Thanks, Will. Rob?
I think, let's talk about data. I think profitability is key, but we've got productivity and sustainability, which are going to become more and more pertinent as we go forward. And I think data helps us certainly in those marginal gains, but also see where we're making those gains and tell that story.
Thank you. Graham?
Yeah, so I'll sort of mirror what Rob said about productivity and profitability, but I think I would urge everybody's got enough data to be able to be able to come up with profitability, and I just urge people to actually have a go from the most basic level to the most complex level. We can do it right the way across the board, as Will and Rob both could as well. So I think it's important to look at that.
Thanks, Graham. Chris, it's never easy to be the last one, and especially everything else has been said. You've got to think of something new. But yeah, what are your thoughts? Your take-home sort of message for people?
Yeah, well, Will took my start simple. I do think that's key. Start simple. It doesn't have to be too complex. You can get drowned in data. But my other thing would be, if you're just doing something because you've always done it, you can't manage the unmanageable. You need to know data about what you're doing so that you can actually manage that.
Thank you. Look, thanks everybody for joining us on this Farmers Weekly Transition webinar. The bottom line, how to use data to improve your farm productivity. I hope that's been useful to everyone. I'm going to thank our panel: Will Foyle, Chartered Surveyor with Hutchinson's; Richard Hooper, who leads the Future Farm team at Harper Adams; Rob Nightingale, agronomist and sustainability specialist at Frontier; Chris Hewis, catchment advisor for Anglian Water; and Graham Barrett, National Precision Services Manager and Rural Consultant at Agravista. Thank you very much. This will be available for those who want to log in and watch again on the Farmers Weekly YouTube channel, I believe. And if you do want to subscribe or to look for other Farmers Weekly Transition webinars, you can do so by visiting fwi.co.uk. But for now, thank you everybody for watching, for contributing, for your questions, and thank you to our panel for answering them. So until next time, I'm Johan Tasker. Thank you very much.